Welcome back to Malden's Revolution. I'm Mark Linehan. Many people think of history as something static. What happened is what happened, and nothing changes. And while actually changing the past remains possible only in science fiction, what changes often and always is our knowledge of the past. And while some facts, people, and even events are never known, most of history is merely forgotten and is waiting to be rediscovered, retaught, and understood for the first time. Many people think that we know everything there is to know about the American Revolution, but the truth is there's been so much focus on the group of men collectively called the Founding Fathers that the work of our neighbors and our ancestors has often been lost. And in all honesty, some of this country's most persistent myths and fairy tales were written while the war was still being fought. And credit for great achievements doesn't always go to the most worthy, but the most vocal. Often it is a small, even ordinary action by an ordinary person that sets into motion what we later know to be events of great importance. And we discover new information about the actions of common people from our past every day. And today, we're going to tell you a story that has been lost for 250 years. And what makes it remarkable is that it's not some lost or buried chapter of our past, but a small part of one of the most familiar stories in American history. Listen, children, and you shall hear of the Midnight Ride of Paul Revere. Wait, but we already did the Midnight Ride. Paul Revere rode down here, went to Somerville, took a hard right, banged to Huey and Medford, went to Arlington, yeah. That's true, we did talk about Paul Revere, but you may remember when Paul Revere made it to Medford, I said one writer that we know his name is Martin Herrick, he heads north and he warns Stoneham, and I think he also warns Reading. Martin Herrick goes up to Stoneham and Reading, he goes up this way, and then an unknown writer is the one who heads back the way we just came, and he's the one who warns Malden, Chelsea, and potentially Lynn. For 250 years, the writer who warned Malden on the night of April 18th into the 19th of 1775 has been unidentified. In The History of Malden by Deloraine Pender Corey, this is all that is said about the Midnight Rider of Malden. Early on the morning of April 19th, it is said, a horseman came furiously along the Medford Road, crying as he came in the stillness of the night, the regulars are out. When he came to the door of Kettle's Tavern, no one was stirring, blah, 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 blah. The meeting house bell was rung, messengers were hastily dispatched to the parts of town, and the horseman departed to spread the news farther away. So our eminent historian, our premier historian in Malden, simply refers to the writer as a horseman. Derek W. Beck, Igniting the American Revolution, says this, meanwhile, after Revere had alerted the Medford Minutemen, they too had sent off a writer. It was Martin Herrick who traveled northward all the way to Salem. So Derek W. Beck implies that only one writer left Medford, and it was Martin Herrick. Now, we do know who Martin Herrick is. He is well documented that he was the one who left Medford and went to Stoneham and then Reading and then the Lynn End, which I believe is now Linfield. So Martin Herrick, we know who that was, and his grave is well marked. He has monuments to him up in the north of Massachusetts. But one of the definitive works of The Midnight Ride of Paul Revere is Paul Revere's Ride by David Hackett Fisher, and this is what he has to say about the writer who warned Malden. While the alarm was spreading rapidly to the north, Paul Revere and his fellow Whigs started yet another courier in a different direction, east from Medford to the town of Malden. This express rider delivered the alarm to a Whig leader who went to an outcropping called Bell Rock and rang the town bell. From Malden, the alarm was carried east to Chelsea on the Atlantic coast. So historian after historian after historian, even the most recent book about Paul Revere that just came out a couple months ago, they all specify that someone went from Medford to Malden to Chelsea, but they are all perfectly satisfied with not knowing who this express rider was. And for 250 years, we have not known the identity of Malden's Midnight Rider. Until now. Alan Foulds is a historian from Reading, Massachusetts, and is involved with both the Reading Historical Society and the Linfield Historical Society. He has a podcast, a series, and has written extensively on the Midnight Ride of Paul Revere, in addition to Boston's ballparks and the Masons. In addition to his history work, Alan serves as the town moderator for the town of Reading. We talked in downtown Medford. Alan, thank you so much for joining me today, and congratulations on being the first guest interview on Malden's Revolution.
Oh, well, thanks for inviting me.
Oh, it's such a pleasure to have you. So first off, tell us a little bit about yourself and your particular interests and what chapters of history you're most interested in.
All right. Well, actually, I live in Reading, where I'm heavily involved in stuff there. But I grew up in the town of Linfield, and was always interested in the local history, especially around the Revolution, because Linfield was a part of it, as was Malden, right from the very first day. And it was fun to be able to walk to places where things happened.
I hear that you have a podcast and you've written a book, I believe?
Yes, yeah. I've written a couple of books. I have a podcast called It's Also History, Tales and Tidbits from Alan's Archives. It's little stories of things that you probably didn't hear in high school history class, but are of interest and in some cases very important.
So here we are, we have a historian from Reading and we have a nerd from Malden, and we're here in Medford. So what is it? Tell us a little bit about what it is that brought us to Medford today. What was it in your expertise? What subject have you been studying that brought us to Medford today?
Well, Linfield's story, as well as Malden's story, really begins right here. It's like a tale of four guys. There was a doctor named Simon Tufts who lived right across the street here. He was a teaching doctor. And the other three people are the three medical students that he had working with him at the time. Plus, there's a cameo appearance by Paul Revere.
All right, so it's April 19th, 1775, Alan. Can you give us a lay of the land? What are we looking at right now if we were in Medford Square 250 years ago?
All right, well, right across here, where the Wayside building is, was where Dr. Simon Tufts' house was. There was nothing between here and the next. You can see the grayish house up there. That's where Isaac Hall lived, who was captain of the Medford militia. So they were effectively side by side at the time.
Okay, so Dr. Simon Tufts right here has got three medical students, like you said.
Right.
So tell us again, who are these medical students and why is this important to our story?
Well, the three medical students, at least two of them that we know of, and probably the third, all were part of the story. John Brooks, who had actually graduated, so to speak, had moved on, was a captain of the local militia, became a major within a couple of months in the Continental Army, and ended up being attached to George Washington. And in fact, in New York, at the Francis Tavern, when the Declaration of Independence came through to Washington, he asked Brooks to read it to the troops. He was
wow.
did it. And then he later went on to become governor of the Commonwealth. So John Brooks, at the age of 21, moved up to Reading and he roomed at a house called the Damon House on John Street. Still there, by the way. It's in private hands, but it's still there. So he moved in. At the age of 21, he was a young, fit guy who was also very active in the local militia here. He joined up not only with the militia, but with the Minute Company, that group of faster, younger guys who were prepared to march at a minute's notice. Not only did he join, but they elected him as captain. So he's up there as the new doctor, captain of the Minute Company, and of course he knew the other students that he was with here, John Sprague and Martin Herrick. Well, Martin Herrick had come from Reading's North Parish, which is today the town of North Reading, although he was a teacher in Linfield. And the third member was John Sprague of Malden.
Tell us a little bit about the events of April 18th and the 19th, of what happened here.
The night of April 18th, Paul Revere rides in after being directed here by Dr. Joseph Warren. He goes to the Isaac Hall house, and according to Linfield legend, he went right next door to Simon Tufts to tell these two medical students. Well, Martin Herrick rode northward with the alarm. We're not sure exactly what his route was, but most likely he stopped at the home of Samuel Sprague, who was the captain of the Stoner militia. All we know is that Herrick rode by the house, and we know, according to Sprague's own diary, this is Samuel Sprague, that a rider came up from Medford, knocked on my door, gave the alarm, and rode into the night. Very dramatic. It's kind of cool. Presumably, this is Herrick. He rode northward by Lake Quannapowitt in what is now Wakefield, and then on to the Damon House in Reading. That leaves our third guy, John Sprague. Now, a lot of this is just surmising, but it's an educated guess. John Sprague was the other medical student who was from Malden. Well, all we know is somebody came from Medford up to Malden, because the Malden history says a rider came up from Medford, knocked on the door of Kettle's Tavern, which was the meeting place for the Malden militia. Militiamen fanned out from there to gather the rest of the company while that rider headed north. My guess is he went to Saugus, which was Lynn's third parish at the time, because in the Saugus history, a rider came up from Malden with the word. So was that Sprague? My guess is almost definitely yes. Somebody came from here, and everybody else in that household was so involved that morning. Simon Tufts himself headed to Menotomy, to Arlington, to tend to the colonial troops who were injured. Brooks was already up in Reading. Martin Herrick rode to Reading and then on to Lynn End. That only leaves one person who could possibly have done it. So that's my theory anyway.
So if we're looking at it from this angle, so this is north right up here. So if this is the Simon Tufts house, we think that Martin Herrick went north towards Stoneham and Reading.
Correct, right.
And then this right here, this was the old Salem Road. And so we think that Dr. John Sprague rode this way up back towards Malden and Chelsea.
That would be my guess, yeah. Martin Herrick and your hero, John Sprague, actually lived almost parallel lives. They went back to their hometowns. Both were naval surgeons, both captured twice in the war, and then lived out their lives as both doctors and teachers in their hometowns.
When I first read that, I almost thought it was a typo because I was like, what are the odds that two, roommates in medical school, for lack of a better term, what are the odds that two roommates would both be captured twice as naval surgeons?
I know. But luckily for the story anyway, they were on different ships, so yeah.
Some of the other anecdotal evidence, because obviously what we would love is, that diary that says, I did this on this day, and here's a notary signing that, verifying that I did it. What I love about this theory in particular is that, like you said, John Sprague is of Malden and he's in this house. And so the idea that he would have stayed home, and I think he's 21 years old at the time, the fact that he would have done nothing is absurd because he enlists in the Continental Army and is appointed the regimental surgeon of the 1st Middlesex almost immediately. And then he fights throughout the entire war. So the idea that you have this man who's such a patriot that he serves all 8 years of the war, but he sat out April 19th, you're like, he had to have done something. But also, the fact that he is a Sprague, one of the oldest families in Malden. So he would have been a trusted voice in Malden. But what I love is that you mentioned that the captain of the Stoneham militia was Captain Samuel Sprague. The captain of the Chelsea militia is also a man named Samuel Sprague. There are so many Spragues.
Yeah.
And so having a Sprague show up in Chelsea and going from Malden to Chelsea up to Saugus, like you said, it fits really nicely. There's also a really funny anecdote that I found that apparently when John Sprague was older, he tragically dies in his 50s, but when he's older, he was considered such a revered citizen that he was actually mocked later in his life because he always insisted on riding on horseback. He did not have a carriage. And in his will, he has all his riding accoutrements that are in there. But apparently there's a thing in Malden where they were like, why is he always on a horse? He should be being pulled. So apparently he was a huge avid fan of being on a horse. So all these little anecdotal pieces, I think, are just absolutely perfect into the legend of Dr. John Sprague.
And by the way, another anecdote, after the war, he bought Kettle's Tavern and turned it into his medical office. And then still later, his daughter and son-in-law bought the house and turned it back into a tavern again, Foster's Tavern.
Well, that's incredible. Thank you so much. Alan, it was such a pleasure having you today.
Well, thank you for inviting me. This is great.
So Dr. John Sprague was the man who warned Malden of the Lexington Alarm and sent us to war against the British Army. Dr. John Sprague then enlisted in the Continental Army and was appointed the regimental surgeon for the 1st Middlesex Regiment and served throughout all 8 years of the war in various capacities, including being captured by the British twice. Dr. John Sprague went on to become one of the most prominent citizens of Malden and was so prominent, in fact, that when a plaque was laid to commemorate the site of the home of Joseph Hills, one of Malden's earliest settlers, the fact that this was also the site of the home of Dr. John Sprague was included on the plaque. Dr. John Sprague passed away in 1803 and was buried in Bell Rock Cemetery before the Sprague family disinterred many of their ancestors and reinterred them here in Malden's newer and current burying ground, Forestdale Cemetery. A whole lot happened 250 years ago, and we have lots more characters to meet and stories to tell. Feel free to leave questions and points of interest in the comments because we'll need those questions and comments for our first Instagram Live. See you soon.